Hello everyone, I'm Jin'taan.
Hey, and I'm moderator, and welcome to the first episode of Jin'mawderation. We were planning on doing a podcast for some time, but both of us were too lazy to actually do anything, and now here we finally are, and we've got a pretty, dense, heavy-packed show for you guys.
So why don't we get right into the first topic? Do you want to introduce us, moderator?
Yeah, so I can't even say this with a straight face. Brisker Ball, this whole situation. Any comment, anything?
No comment.
Okay, perfect. Let's get into the news. So, biggest and most kind of major ongoing thing in EVE right now would be the ongoing Winterco and Tappy Legacy War.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to see that kick off. I'm not super familiar with the political situation, but the first run up, the first thing that happened in the lead up to this war was, Snuff attacking, I think, what was Villy's move up. Do you know anything more about that?
Yeah, so I am in Snuffed Out, and what had come about was that Villy was in the process of moving Armor Titans through Losec was redeploying their super fleet. They happened to be within our area. Villy had contacted High either close to or the day of, asking if we were going to a certain timer, and High more or less chose to not answer that question, leave it ambiguous, because if he answered yes or no, it would be kind of indicative of what it was we were actually doing, which was attempting to attack his move up. So we left that pretty ambiguous. Villy took that to mean that we weren't going to do anything against him, and we attacked them when some of his supers and titans were currently in the invuln in the session between being invuln and actually tethering. So we
So during the delay timer, when you jump into a system, obviously there's a delay timer where you can't be tethered to a structure, and you struck during that 60-second window or 30-second window. I can't remember how long it is.
Yeah, so thank you for clarifying that for me. I was kind of struggling with that. Yeah, that's basically where we caught them. Unfortunately, our in was bad. We would have caught quite a few more, but we'll kind of take what we can get. And that was the first step of...
So how did that come about, though? Isn't Legacy, at least Tappy, a lot bigger than Snuff? Was it a Dread Bomb? Did you guys drop your own Supers and Titans on their Supers and Titans? How did that come about?
It was mostly a Dread Bomb. We had some Supers and Titans that were there, but if I recall correctly, the majority of our damage was Dreadnoughts, but the kind of idea was that you have the Titans right in the Supers to get off Alpha and basically kill anything that isn't tethered, and also if you lock something right in that invuln period between being tethered, you don't actually get tethered. So if you're locked by someone that's being hostile against you, you're not actually going to be able to tether. So the idea was to, get tackle on as many things as we could with Hicks and just enough hard tackle that they wouldn't be able to go anywhere. Unfortunately, we didn't get as many kills as I mentioned earlier, but that was kind of the first step of what led to this. I want to say it was a HTP Keepstar that's located in Kamal that Snuff and Init got to its final hold timer.
Yeah, so we end up with the Init and Snuff attempt to kill that Keepstar, as you said, and then a very unexpected guest turned up as PanFam decided to join forces with Test in this timer. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so more or less what ended up happening there is that initially it was implied on kind of Test comms that Test was going to go there to attack the Keepstar, but it ended up defending it instead. And even though in it and Snuff we had about a combined 100 Titans and quite a sizable super and capital force behind us, we looked at, what low-sec hostiles had, staged roughly in the area. We looked at what we expected the Test response to be if it went to heavy tie-dye. test super fleet was either 2 or 3 mids away, and they'd be able to just heavily dogpile into the system, and decided it wasn't really worth it for a keep star that I don't think anyone really cares about all that much in the end.
Didn't even want that keep star kill anyway, and that whole thing ended up with a lot of Reddit memes that I very much enjoyed, especially the Sun Tzu meme. That did make me chuckle, that one.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously want to kill a keep star when you can, but just wasn't really in the cards. The weird segue that we go into next is that Winterco and Legacy are now at war, and we've got some arrivals to the Winterco. Elo Knight and all of Origin merged into Fraternity. I don't know what happened to some of the other Black Legion Corps, but I think some of their members kind of wide-dotted into Origin, and now Elo is commanding the Winterco US time zone.
Yeah, why don't we reel this back though and go like to some of the setup here, because I don't think I really covered this on my channel. I was busy actually fighting in the war, but during the last time Legacy and Winterco came to blows, and that was during the much bigger conflict in the south, and I dubbed that kind of the continuation war. That's the name that I've used for it, as most people seem to think that it was either a continuation of the Blue Donut War, or if you ask some certain very narrative-minded Imperium people, that it was just the next episode in World War B, because they never really lost that one, did they?
Yeah, that's a pretty cringy narrative, but hey.
It seemed to satisfy both sides, so it's why it's stuck with in my own head. No one else seems to have named it though.
Yeah, I always prefer when these kind of wars naturally develop a name for themselves instead of people having to force something on it.
Yeah, and during that kind of time though, it was after the destruction of the DRF super capital fleet in SeaTac L. Was that the system? I think it was. Shit, I can't remember, but they effectively lost most of their super capital fleet, and they retreated into the welcoming arms of Legacy. And because Winterco at the time was at war with them, that then brought the Wrath of Winterco down on the eastern side of Legacy, and that meant that the fighting predominantly focused on Immensea, and then later on in, what's the region just to the south of Immensea? Let me check. I'm gonna get this. Tenerifis. And has the fighting really been around that same kind of point here? Where did it kick off? Where was the first strike from the Chinese here, if you know?
To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure. There have been some battle reports that I'll link after in the show notes so people can read, but there's been some pretty sizable capital and super capital fights in EU time zone and in AU time zone, when naturally the Chinese player base is going to be strongest against Winterco, going mostly in favor of Legacy here.
Yeah, and obviously then you have Elo Knight and Origin joining Winterco, and those guys are super hardened. But why don't you actually explain who Elo Knight is to the audience? And I'm curious to hear your answers to the question of, is Elo Knight the best FC in the game right now?
So Elo Knight, for people who might be newer to the game, was an FC that's been around for, I want to say, the better part of I want to say a decade now. We're getting old. Basically, Elo Knight was the longtime head of the Alliance Black Legion. That's been remade a couple times. Elo quit a few years ago. He's come back, but Black Legion was always a group that was relatively nomadic and was infamous for dropping dread bombs on anything that moved and killing supers and titans with that. Back when there were relatively less capitals and super capitals in the game. And
it was
also
back before fatigue existed as well. That was kind of a key part of their playing style, is that they were able to move across the map and have an impact all across the map at the same time. Because that kind of fit how Elo wanted to play the game.
Yeah, definitely. And he was kind of one of the casualties of the fatigue change, necessary as it was. So Origin was able to, And also the jump ranges on dreadnoughts were longer pre-fatigue change than even what they are now. So they would just have chain signals across the map, and in a matter of 10 or so minutes, you could be halfway across the universe and dread bomb you if you were doing something and not being careful with your capitals.
Yeah, so getting back to that, he's always been kind of this really good sub-capital FC. At least that's been my perspective on him as well, is that he's always been really good at piloting these high skill compositions, like the Slippery Pete's back in the day. He was one of the first FCs to make those work. He's always had this great thing with the Munins, and especially given now that Munins are very much in the meta, that's playing to his strengths. But is he the best subcap FC in the game right now, or is the best? Sorry, do subcaps even matter in this current war? Really?
Oh man, that's really loaded. Do subcaps matter in the current war? I mean, yes and no, depending on the scale that you're talking about. Elo Knight has always been someone who has been he's always been in the running for one of the best smaller scale. When I say smaller scale, I mean not like coalition block level fighting. He's never really been someone until more recently that was really kind of enjoying like the 1,000+ people in system. I think of him more as someone who is very good at taking out Munins and understanding the engagement profile better than anyone else at the time of what they could and couldn't do, and just absolutely rinsing people in that era.
Yeah, as someone who has been thoroughly rinsed by Elo once, I can attest to his ability to do so. But yeah, so what have you actually seen any ops? What's he actually been getting up to on the front, or has it been more of a morale thing? I'm really curious.
So the nice thing about, I think the real draw for Origin joining Fraternity, right, is Fraternity gets a US time zone FC that's probably better than they have anyone else in that time zone. I can't think of anyone else. I'm not really up to date on who are the major FCs for Fraternity, but Elo's got to be, if not, he's going to be number 1 or number 2 in their US time zone. And he also brings the experience of, just capital brawling on Tranquility, and just the, understanding that if he can just go dread bomb people and Fraternity will pay for out of his wallet. I mean, Fraternity's got kind of a massive income scheme, as alluded to in the war deck of legacy against them, and being able to have all your dread bombs be subsidized by a giant alliance has got to be pretty appealing.
Absolutely. And how does Elo Knight match up then? Because this is the US time zone, but US time zone is definitely where Test has always been the strongest. And right now they have Villy and Pro God Legend. What do you think the matchups are like there? Because my read on that is that Villy is probably the better coalition level FC than Elo, but Elo would probably beat Villy in like a 200-man fight.
It's really all this kind of weird situation. It's entirely situational.
Oh yeah, all they're seeing is it can come down to like how good the organization you're a part of is, as much as how good you are as an FC. Logistics win wars just as much as actions on the field.
Yeah, I'm just getting like a little bit of like I'm throwing up in my mouth a little, having to like give Elo Knight too much or Villy too much credit.
It's just fun. It's just fun. Don't worry about it. You can no comment this one as well if you'd like, man. But yeah, so let's move on from trying to weigh up the FCs and go more to how these battles have actually played out, because that comes onto what I talked about earlier, which is there really a place for subcaps in this meta? One of the battle reports that really stood out for me is the battle report where there was like 50 or something Titans from Tess that were just trying to BFG like a Ferox fleet off the field, and they kept whiffing, but eventually they caught one. They caught it, and that was it. That was the fight over, effectively.
Yeah, so one of
50 is obviously a gross exaggeration for the people listening.
Well, no, it's not that gross of an exaggeration. I want to say that in terms of Titans that were actually on the field, some of them aren't going to be represented because they don't get a kill, so they're not actually represented by anything. at least on a kill board. But in terms of the video that I've seen, it looks like in the various Titan waves, because we have Titan waves in 2019 of just random test Titans coming in, it looked like they had upwards of 30 or so you're not that far off, really. To answer the question, do subcaps really matter that much? At least like on an objective level of whether or not you're going to lose a keep star or a major timer where people are prepping a few days in advance for. No, not really. They don't. It's an ongoing discussion about Titan and carrier, just general capital application to subcaps, which I'm sure we can rant about for the next hour if we want.
Yeah, like from my perspective, what we're seeing a mixture of BFGs, Whores, and support fighters just kind of crowd subcaps out of the field. And we're probably going to come back to that more when we talk about the balancing touches that CCP have done. But the fact that you can just throw Titans onto the field and very easily use them to take out subcapital groups unsupported is insane. Like, I was thinking the other day that it would almost be better if we reverted back to the you can DD subcaps, but it's one at a time. Like, I would almost rather AFC user getting a headshot than the way that we have it now.
I mean, you say that, but then we have people who will throw a literal 256-man Titan fleet minus whatever fac support they have in it, and they'll just one-shot each faction battleship that's on the grid.
Oh yeah, that's true. That would also then happen.
Yeah,
that would be even worse.
Yeah, because we're in 2019 and everyone, myself included, has a Titan alt. So
can't wait for those Angel Titan.
Oh god.
But yeah, I think it's a real huge problem. Like the Whores and LR guns are probably the other big thing. But my main complaint about super capital balancing right now is not that they can do damage to subcaps. I think that's probably fine. I think it's the fact that they can do it without relying on support that is not super capital. Like the fact that super capitals can tackle and web for themselves is really just goes against the inherent design of what keeps EVE Online fair for newer players, because it gives them a way to interact up the chain.
Yeah, I mean, at least on the subcapital level, right? You have ships that usually either do one, they can do it well, but they don't do anything else well. So you've got ships that, that are giant bricks, but they don't actually do usually a lot of damage, and they've got no utility really. You don't see a Battens, for example, a ship we'll talk about later because they kind of got buffed. You don't see them tackling other ships or kind of having the utility that supers do. Going back to kind of the Titan thing that you mentioned, the problem really there is that if you're at close range, you get destroyed by Haws. If you go out to a more mid-range, you're going to get destroyed by the normal Titan guns, because for the most part, you're just going to get webbed on by fighters and tracked at those ranges anyway. If you go out really far to 250 kilometers or 300 kilometers, LR guns still track you anyway. So there's really no situation where, as a subcapital FC, like, hey, I can be here and kind of safe from the super capital umbrella. No, it's the entire grid where you're going to get headshot if you're there. You just cannot be on grid against the ship.
It's not that you can't be on grid, it's that you can't share the same engagement envelope. You can't engage anything around Titans. Like, that's why one of the reasons I think why we've seen the kind of development of the Bush Raven concept, because it can move around the engagement envelope of a structure without staying in the engagement envelope of Titans. Like, you can continue to shoot a structure as you move away from Titans, and they're one of the few things that can do that reasonably.
Yeah, you can definitely go on the opposite edge of the Titans. The problem is that once the Titans get within 300 kilometers and can lock you, they do more or less just headshot you because they're still tracking you. But we're getting in way deep on a tangent, and we have plenty of other things I think we want to talk about.
Yeah, let's keep moving, but that's something, especially the Bush Ravens, that's probably something we're going to save for another episode entirely, because I think we both have a lot to say on that, and I'm in fact writing an article on it, so stay tuned for that, kids. So we went through a lot of these battles. Do you want to summarize these briefly? Like, what's the score here? Is Winneco coming ahead on all of them? Is Legacy coming ahead on all of them? Is it a mixed bag? You know, who's getting real the better of these exchanges, both strategically and money-wise?
So strategically, it's kind of hard to say because nothing of consequence has died. For the most part, dreads are just replaceable very, very quickly. It does not take a long time to build a dreadnought. If you lose them, okay, you're out insurance money. We'll talk about that later. But for the most part, you can just build dreads relatively quickly. Not a lot of supers or titans have really died, and most of the fights where these have happened have just kind of been these organic Rorquals get tackled, test escalates, fraternity escalates, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're in this massive engagement that all of a sudden has nothing to do with the original intent of.
So kind of like these micro BTAC R5s. Not like in the same scale, but in the fact that it's just we're gonna escalate. Oh god, we're gonna escalate too. Ah shit.
Yeah, and I mean those are always the fights that are the most enjoyable, as opposed to these you know, week-long prep pings where you get the entire universe on a grid and you can't actually play the game.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's good to see that that kind of content can be generated, though. There was definitely some wonder if that was even possible in Modern Eve. Like, if it was possible to even get under super capital umbrellas with subcaps to start these engagements off. And I'm happy to see that that is at least happening right now. It's just going to be a question of, does the line stagnate and do we go back to the kind of citadel-based trench warfare that we saw during the during the last half of like the Winter War in 2017. Like, that was probably the worst I've ever seen warfare get to in Eve in terms of enjoyability. I hope we don't get back to that.
Yeah, it remains to be seen though, because it doesn't seem like the underlying fundamental mechanics that cause that problem.
Yeah, we don't have the same like the Rorqual thing that we used to, and we don't have sword fleets to the same extent that we used to because of the claw changes. That's true. That's true. But you know, that's always been on my mind. Like, every time I see an Entosis war now, that's just what comes back. Like, we're like literal flashbacks to the trenches. Anyway, yeah. Speaking of flashbacks, do you want to talk about balance? Because it feels like we are two people who have talked about this topic forever and ever. Or do you want to talk about... Oh, sorry, no. We've got to talk about the Tappy Alliance update first, don't we? Because that was put out.
Yeah, so naturally, every time war were declared, you get a large update from the Alliance trying to hype up all their members and, you know, being like, hey, this is going on, be here, do all this, stop, you know, crabbing in your belts and get moving to the front line because we're going to war, you know, get all the numbers we can in fleet. It's an interesting read. We'll have the full update posted in the pastebin for people to look at. It's honestly pretty cringy for me to read as someone who kind of understands the underlying politics of what's going on here. But I'll leave that for the readers to decide.
I think, in all honesty, like, all Alliance updates are a little bit cringy if you're not part of the Alliance. But, you know, it seems like a fairly good one. It's got all of the stuff that they're going to do. It's talking about preparations, where to move, getting people to the front, telling people, especially new players, what to learn. And, you know, I think the key sentence, however, here is, we still need as many Titans as we can possibly get. Titans win wars. If you can get one, then get it as soon as possible. Resubscribe them and move them up to 08 TAC N. All shield supers and titans should be in 08 TAC N, and all armor titans and supers should be in Esoteria right now. And this should tell you two things as a viewer. Not only does Test, you know, an alliance that was never really known for their super fleet, have a super fleet. They have two super fleets, and they're considered the most important strategic asset that they have right now. And that's always going to be the case with any super fleet. I don't think we'll ever get to the point where large coalitions don't have them and don't really value them. But this is probably the most value we've seen put on them in a long time. At least since the capital changes.
Yeah, so as you're kind of alluding to, and we've been ranting about earlier, and as Progress Legend says here in the update, Titans do win wars. I mean, the more Titans you have, the better, the more Doomsdays you can get up to just alpha off other Titans on the other field, because that's what the meta is, and that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, because Titans and Super Capitals is the only thing that can stay on grid with Titans and Super Capitals.
You know what? Actually, fuck it. I'm going to dig into the meat of this.
Yeah, let's go on to it. So this is the second section. We're going to talk about balance a bit, and let's just dig right into like some of the changes that have been done, and we can talk about why they maybe don't address the problem enough.
Sure. So the big one that comes right off the bat is that Haws on Titans do 50% of the damage that they used to.
Seems like a good change. It kind of kills Titan ratting as well, which I think might have been part of the point of this change. I can't speak from CCP's perspective there, but that's my interpretation.
So what this does kind of on the scale of having, say, maybe 30 Titans in a fleet is it means that you're not alphaing off the subcaps that you might be wanting to kill, at least on a battleship level. You're going to apply a lot of damage, you're going to hurt things, but it's not going to change the fact that when you have a ton of Titans in your fleet, you've got 80 or more of these, you're just going to start one-shotting anything that's not a command ship on field, because even half of a fuck ton is still a lot of damage, and there's no real way around that.
Yeah, like it doesn't matter that one Titan can't kill a Hick, it matters that 50 Titans can kill a Hick. Is the way I've tended to describe this before.
Yeah, that's an elegant summary of the problem.
Yeah, and that's actually further compounded with the fact with how command destroyers work right now, in that you can use the mobile jump drive field generators to move interdictor bubbles. So you can't even use the cloaky interdictor methods that we used to have for kind of waterboarding super capitals. So you can't even really punish the usage of them in the same way that you used to be able to. Anyway, after that we saw like some general changes to fighters and carriers in general, with the fighter application nerfs and also the NSA getting changed, so you can no longer warp when the NSA is active. And I think that's personally a good change. I think that's probably one of the better ones, but it doesn't affect their combat capability, it affects their ability to make money again. You know, all of these changes seem really angled towards the economic problems that capitals bring to the game, but they don't seem angled towards the actual combat gameplay health balance of what's causing capitals to be a problem in the game. That's my perspective on this, at least.
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, that's about right. It does sort of act for at least like a 1 minute siege cycle where you're kind of stuck there. But my understanding is that if you're jump cap, you can still just jump out if you're ever in any real danger, even if you have the NSA on. So
I think that's correct, yeah.
That would be maybe something I'd like to see them add, is the blocking, being able to jump out.
There's a lot of situations right now where you can jump that I don't think you should be able to jump, like the same with the ansuplexes as well. Like the fact that you can jump through an ansuplex gate when you're scrammed is really dumb.
So what's your this is kind of an older change, but it kind of does tie in because of the logistics that do go into prosecuting a war like this on either side. What's your general take on the impact of the ansuplex jump gate, and where do you stand on them?
I was actually initially kind of in favor of them not having fatigue. That was my original position. I'll put my hand up and say that was probably not the correct position to have. I think after seeing how it's impacted the game, we have gone back to kind of the same problems that we used to have, just because they enable the movement of capitals as well. Like, I think capitals should 100% have fatigue, and I think subcapitals should still have some level of fatigue as well. The fact that you can't attack on two fronts and actually create meaningful diversions. Like, the fact that you can't create meaningful diversions is tactically impactful, even if it isn't strategically impactful. Like, you're never going to be able to prosecute a two-front war in EVE, but being able to, poke at some area of their space, know they're going to be there, and then attack somewhere else the same day. Like, the fact that that doesn't matter right now is probably bad from just a tactical point of view. Like, I think the fact that you used to be able to do that was one of the better aspects of Phobe. The jump fatigue changes.
Yeah, I to be honest, I was never really in favor of these the Ansiblux, just because it seems to circumvent the whole concept of fatigue in the first place, which was initially fatigue was, let's be honest, was taken to the extreme in Phoebe. So for people who might be playing, now, and they never experienced what Phoebe was like, Phoebe, when they introduced jump fatigue, made it so that very limited ranges could be jumped in a capital, shorter than what they are now, and the penalty was much more harsh for taking jumps.
It was a maximum of 5 light years for all capitals, and we eventually got that to 6 for supers and 7 for regular capitals.
And then the blue timer on the fatigue was capped at 5 hours, but originally it was something like a month. So
it was originally uncapped, I think.
Yeah,
and then they capped it to 30 days.
There were a number of changes that were implemented there, but I mean, 30 days and unlimited were functionally the same thing. And then they eventually cut that down to 5 hours.
More healthy. Like, the fact that your gameplay sessions generally do not interact with your other gameplay sessions is good. Like, the fact that if I log on and jump around today, I probably won't have anything to deal with tomorrow is good. I think that's the way it should be. As long as it's not, as long as you're not jumping 20 times in a day, you're generally fine. And I think that's the way it should be. And that's why Ansiblexes are kind of bad, because you can jump 20 times in one day and it's not going to affect your future. There should be some small fatigue associated with it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the weird thing for me is it basically goes back to the pre-Phoebe days. It kind of just undoes the whole point of the changes where, like we were talking about earlier, you used to be able to take subcaps and all sorts of capitals and just bridge them or jump them around across the universe. And you can do that with an Ansiblex, provided that you have the infrastructure. And it just encourages the trench warfare that you were referencing earlier, where you can get from one end of your empire to another end. And it's very difficult to actually make any sort of gains on that as an attacker.
Yeah, and we saw these kind of economic but also gameplay changes then feed into more economic changes with the Rorqual nerf, and that also follows on from the Anomaly nerf, although that was before this most recent patch. So personally, I'm super in favor of this. I think Rorquals are kind of overpowered, but these nerfs are not to the problem. I don't think any individual Rorqual has ever really been an issue. The issue has always been that guy with 10 Rorquals or that guy with 12 Rorquals.
And we're back.
Yep, we're back. I'll cut that out. Alright, we just had some brief technical difficulties. Let's kind of get back into it here. We were talking about the Rorqual and Anomaly nerf, and I was kind of saying that I didn't really think that one Rorqual was ever the problem. It's always a guy with 10 Rorquals, It's it's the fact that Rorquals make a lot of money and scale well and can be relatively well defended with a super capital umbrella.
Yeah, so the major rant about the Rorquals has always been that they scale vertically, meaning that you can stack 10 of them in the same system, in the same belt, and there's no real penalty for doing so. In fact, it's encouraged implicitly by the mechanics to do, and that there's no depletion on these belts, and they respawn fast enough such that the optimal way to play the game, and a number of alliances have executed upon this very well, is just deploy a lot of infrastructure in one region and create a super umbrella to protect these oracles so that they're, for the most part, never in any real danger. And then you have tens of thousands of people in one or two regions of the game, which seems somewhat antithetical to any sort of really meaningful or engaging risk or...
I mean, let's not get into the argument on that side, on like risk and stuff. I definitely think that's an argument to be made there. But from my point of view is it's just not very engaging gameplay. It's just not good for... I don't really know how to put it, but like the main way that risk tends to happen in PvE is not actually doing the activity. I tend to find it's in traveling between places where you're going to do that activity. That's when you tend to have to go through areas of space that are not super well like protected, or where you don't have perfect intel. And that's why spreading out is important, because it gives points for which the PvE and the PvP players can run into each other unintentionally. And that creates, those kind of ad hoc battles that we were talking about. Because there is value in PvE. Like, PvE is super important to the game. It's the lambs in the field. You have to have the lambs in the field for the wolves to be able to come out and find them. That's the reason why farms and fields, which is what we kind of have with raw claws. I think that this is like the most extreme version of farms and fields we've ever had. It's just not very good.
Yeah, I think a better way than to say risk is that the current mechanics don't really allow for any sort of emergent gameplay that has always been the selling point of EVE Online.
No, there are some people who've been able to do it, like Olmeca with the excavator stealing is like really fun and interesting. And as much as I might not appreciate his Reddit posting because it's terrible, I do appreciate what he does, and I appreciate that it's possible in the game. But it sucks that you have to go that kind of length to get meaningful economic interdiction options. Like, I think you're definitely touching on a key point though there, that right now it doesn't feel like there's a lot of good subcapital options for having a meaningful impact on someone's economic output. Like, you have to be able to dread bomb someone with like 50 plus dudes. And that's just not feasible for the little guy to do.
Yeah, so taking a back step from kind of the whole Rockwell and...
that was a very holistic, like we zoomed out very far.
Very political thing, is that as a general rule, when you can encourage the most broad and wide variety of gameplay to touch upon what individual members of your player base want to play or might be excited about engaging in, and the more ships and varieties of combat, PvE, and just general gameplay experience you have and can offer your player base, you're just going to cast a wider net and get more people interested in engaging with your game. And right now that doesn't really seem to be a thing that's possible given current game design mechanics.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like there's any chance of a breakaway organization doing anything meaningful. I think that's always a key point. Like, you want to be looking at like who's the next up and comer, and it doesn't feel like there's a room for up and comers to do anything. And regardless of or not of if it is actually possible, like, I'm sure there are alliances that are trying to do it, and maybe they will succeed. Like, I don't disagree that it might be possible within the current mechanics. The thing is that if there's a perception of it not being possible, then people won't try and do it in the first place. You have to have like the first successes, like then that needs to start. There has to be some way for a smaller group to get an advantage to then build up into getting the following to make a larger group to make larger things happen, and then you get wars and then you get fun shit, Whereas we kind of have the same faces that we always have. The only new people really are Winterco, and that's because they emigrated from China, basically.
I was going to say that the new kind of alliances that are really making a meaningful impact in the game,
and
as you kind of said, are going to be Fraternity and Ranger Regiment that have existed for a long time, but have, as you said, been bolstered by just the influx of players migrating from Serenity.
Let's actually talk a little bit about Skill U. Is Skill U involved at all in this? Because I know they were supporting Winter in the last war. They deployed down into Immensea and effectively held the line there.
On the battle reports that I've seen, it looks as though they're aligned with Fraternity, which makes sense, but I'm not sure if those battle reports were misaligned or if people just didn't really put the effort into sorting them correctly. But it would make sense that Skill U would not be in favor of anything test ever.
Mm-hmm. Which actually, do you want to talk about... Actually, let's talk about Skill U another day. Like, let's get a guest on to talk about that. Because I know you have a storied past there, and I'm sure CapQ wouldn't like me talking about his baby without someone there to sing his praises. So let's move on to the actual subcap balances, because there was some interesting stuff there. I do actually always love subcap balance, and I think even in places like this, even in times like this when we're obviously focused on these bigger kind of like Titan issues, it is good that they are still thinking about how to improve subcapitals and how to keep that aspect of the game changing. Even if it doesn't matter to us, it matters to the people in high sec, it matters to the people in low sec, you know? And personally, the two buffs that I thought were the most interesting were the Abaddon buffs, because I think the Abaddon is now straight up just the best battleship killing battleship. It's just that you don't ever really need to use battleships to kill battleships right now, which is a shame. But it does something ridiculous like 1200 DPS. It's still got the same crappy cap, but that's fine. Like, you want ships like that to have a weakness that's easy to exploit, and cap always has been the way that people have exploited the Abaddon. You put like utility newts on some battleships and you drive them close to Abaddons and you win the fight. That's just how it works. And also the Harbinger changes plus the beam changes are really cool. Like, I'm actually super interested to see if Harbingers can... I don't expect them to, like, challenge the Ferox just because of, like, the fact that shield reps are so much better than armor reps right now. Especially in the era of 250s and 720s. Like, the fact that both of those can land 2 shots before your armor reps cycle mean that you basically, like, your reps do not exist as an armor ship. You have to have so much more buffer to survive.
Yeah, so kind of to go back to what he was saying about the Abaddon.
Oh, sorry, did I go off on a mad tangent?
Yeah, so the buff to the large energy turret output has gone up by 2.5%
per level.
So
12.5%
at level 5, which is pretty significant. The Harbinger gets a base another 125 power grade, which is a lot actually after max skills. And
it takes it to about 1,940, which is enough to fit plate, AB, and plate MWD and a small like cap booster. So it's actually going a long way to help the Harbinger like have a little bit more tank and a little bit more cap, and that's really good. It's still gonna have those as weaknesses though. It still has less EHP than a Ferox, it still has less cap than a Ferox.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to I might bite my have to bite the bullet here and kind of admit I'm wrong, but I just don't see this pushing the Ferox out. The Ferox is just too powerful. It just does too much, and that's been a rant that both of us have.
It's not that it's too powerful, it's that it has a fucking double optimal bonus. Any ship with a double optimal bonus either has to be nerfed into the ground or is the best ship in the category. That is like, it's always been that way.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's kind of what I'm alluding to by being too powerful. Is it just does too much. It shoots when you have a cruiser that's shooting out to better than in a lot of cases battleship ranges. You have a design problem.
Yeah, I think it is the like one of the main things that's missing now is that there's no room in the game for the close range battleship weapons. Like the pulses, pulses were like the only ones you ever really use, let's be real, in the olden days. Sometimes you'd use autocannons on your maelstroms, but that was for memes. But like you used to be able to actually stay roughly in range of like the extreme, of like cruiser weapons. With the cruiser long range weapons used to be able to get in range of battleship close range weapons, like with the T2 ammo. Like the classic pulse versus HMLs is what I'm referring to, I guess. Like I felt like that was probably the best way for that paradigm to work, because it meant that battle cruisers could still engage battleships, but it meant the battleships still had an advantage versus them.
Yeah, now if you just try using any sort of a close range battleship,
oh yeah, all close.
What happens is you get 50 Haw Titans dropped on you, and you lose your entire fleet in nullsec because you get tackled.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're going up against Feroxes, like what happens if you drop? Let's just wargame this. Like, if you had 50 Feroxes and I had 50 Abaddons, and I drop my 50 Abaddons on 0 on your Feroxes, you lose 10 Feroxes, but then you just move out to like 70k, and now my Abaddons do nothing, and you win the fight. And you can do that in like 6 or 7. You can do that in like under a minute easily.
You probably lose a few more Feroxes than that, but the problem is like the Feroxes don't. The only thing that keeps Feroxes slightly, that keeps him from just being far and away just murder machines, is that rails aren't actually. They do a lot of damage, but they don't have a lot of alpha. Thank fuck. Otherwise, they'd be even more broken than they already are.
Yeah, we could probably rant about this like in a very unstructured way, because we haven't like super thought about this, but subcap balance is. It's probably in. I think subcap balance is actually in the best state it's been for a long time. I don't know about you. I think this is probably one of the better times it's been. Like, if we took out super capitals from the mix, I feel like the subcap meta would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, the problem is that I would like to have this kind of in a vacuum discussion, but the problem is that the reality of the situation is that they're just inexorably linked with the current carrier.
Like right now, what are the main... Like, actually something kind of interesting to do at some point would be to talk about all of the mainline doctrines and why they're used. That would be a cool second episode, so let's think about that. Let's shelve that idea. Before we get onto like that topic again, let's just segue hard into the final thing that's going to be on our mind here, which is the insurance changes. And I know you wanted to bring these up because the changes, they didn't happen in this latest patch, obviously, but the capital payout has been reduced kind of across the board, and I think that's really good, because it's one of the main things we were running into was that losing a capital didn't really mean that much. It cost more almost to lose a Macarial than it did to lose an Archon.
Yeah, so I mean, in ye olden days of Eve, the real way to flex was to have faction battleship fleets or Navy battleship fleets. When people like Pandemic Legion would bring out their NAPOC fleet, that was a big deal, because NAPOCs cost a lot. There wasn't a large supply of them because it was tied to the LP market and faction warfare, which meant that there just wasn't a large supply of these. It was a big deal to have faction battleships out. And now the new faction battleship basically has been the carrier, because it just does everything a faction battleship does for the most part, but better, with some obvious exceptions. And now where we're at is that with the insurance change, it costs significantly more to use these. I think those are definitely needed on facs and carriers and oracles as well. What I'm not a fan of is changing them for dreadnoughts. Basically, what you're going to be implicitly doing by changing the cost of insurance on dreadnoughts is that you make it more expensive to throw dreadnoughts at people. And I think just from a gameplay perspective, it's good to encourage people to just dread bomb people and create content that way. It just seems like a more engaging and more healthy way to approach Eve, saying, hey, you can throw all these threads at people and try to kill supers and titans with them.
Yeah, and like one other aspect of the game that it definitely touches on is the economic side again. Like it definitely seems like a lot of these nerfs were focused towards that aspect of the game because insurance fraud was one of the main ways that we saw people turning minerals into ISK, especially with like maelstroms and stuff like that. I saw so many battle reports on Reddit that were just someone PDSing like 200 maelstroms off their Fortizar or whatever, and like there's nothing wrong with insurance fraud. It's just that when it gets to that level, there's probably something wrong with the economy.
Yeah, if the underlying economic situation in Delve, where people are strip mining belts, is such that it's cheaper or they make more of a profit by just insurance frauding ships, as opposed to exporting those minerals or creating something with those minerals and actually meaningfully using it, you've got just a weird economic situation that's really unhealthy.
Yeah. Well, let's not talk about exclusively the bad. Let's talk about a little bit of good news. The final topic, which is the tournament that I'm running and you're commentating on. We're going to shill.
There's one major topic that I want to kind of hit on that you're going to really appreciate, and that's going to be the fax changes to those supers and capitals. It sort of ties into
we didn't talk about that, did we? Let's go into it. Sure. So rep stacking. That was a huge, huge change, and I can't believe we walked over it. Effectively, for those of you who don't know, there is now going to be a stacking penalty on remote repairs. It's not going to be the same stacking penalty you're used to for modules. It's a lot more of a light formula, but it is going to change kind of capital warfare to some extent. And more, I know you had some really strong thoughts on that, so just let loose, boy.
Oh yeah, it's not really going to strongly change the small scale fights, but what it does change is that right now, if you're taking dreads and you're going to try to bomb out some titans, you're going to kill the first few titans if you've caught them unaware and they don't have enough fax. But one fax is capable of repping quite a number of dreadnoughts right now, just because everyone will max buffer tank these titans, and that creates this weird dynamic where the ship that's supposed to be good at killing super capitals and titans actually, in fact, isn't fulfilling the role that it's sort of slated to complete. And now with the changes to reps, it much more incentivizes and facilitates just using dreadnoughts en masse against supers and titans, because after about 50 or so faxes repping a titan, you don't get that much of a bonus, and alliances have more or less already developed their internal tools, I'm sure, for how this works and the calculus of what goes into effectively dropping supers and titans and what kind of exposure they have to an incoming dread bomb or just getting shot at by other supers and titans. So I look forward to seeing our new dreadnought overlords, hopefully.
I think everyone just wants to see more supers blow up at the end of the day. Like, that's definitely the intent here. It's just going to be a question of seeing if it pans out that way when we get to the first big post this change capital slug fight. We haven't really seen one yet. Personally, I'm not sure it's going to have that huge of a deal, because I don't feel like 50 faxes repping a titan is still a ridiculously huge amount of EHP rep per second. I don't know how many situations you're going to get to the point where you could kill something that's being repped by 50 faxes, where there is just another 25 faxes adding onto it. And that was, like, in the current situation, how often was that happening? And I would argue, not that often.
Yeah, like you're alluding to, you get to these really weird situations where when you have 5,000 people on grid, you get to this weird FC exclusive knowledge of, well, are guns really going to even work in this situation from dreadnoughts? What's kind of the meaningful damage output? And that's kind of these weird arcane set of game mechanics that don't really apply to anything that members are going to see on a day-to-day basis.
FCing in like those 3K fights is something you have to just learn how to do. It's so weird and stodgy, and I'm not very good at it, and I don't enjoy it. But yeah. So, is there anything else we want to talk about with balance?
I think we more or less hit on everything. We should have actually led with the Titan changes. That's the super hot fire that's been dropped this patch, and we'll see how that plays out in the ongoing war. I'm hoping that we get to see some really real bloodbaths coming up.
Yeah, here's hoping. It'll be interesting to see if I'll just let things play out, and I'm not going to call my shot. So let's talk about the tournament a little bit. I alluded to it earlier. You're going to be commentating on it. I'm organising it. I'm not going to be on the desk or anything. I've got to do a ton of behind the scenes work to get it running. But I'm hoping it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'm washed out now, so I've gone to the bench and I'm casting these tournaments, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to do this again. Kind of walk us through the structure of your tournament and what this is going to look like.
Yeah, it's going to be a 6v6 tournament. It's kind of a different format to the AT. It's kind of closer to Worlds Collide, if people are still familiar with that format. That was the the Serenity versus TQ fight from 2015? Was it 15?
It might have even been earlier than that, but for people who aren't familiar with that or weren't around that, kind of go through a bit of the rules and what this means for the teams that are going to be competing.
Yeah, it means that effectively you're going to be seeing teams bring a stable of compositions and use them throughout the days of the tournament. And they can't reuse compositions over the course of the days of the tournament. And what that means is that you're going to be seeing new ships and new setups every single match. People aren't going to be just flying the same things over and over again, which is kind of a huge deal for me, because that's one of the few things that really I dislike about the AT, at least in its previous iteration. And I didn't dislike it enough that, I would wish death upon it. However, RIP, the Alliance tournament of this year. Hopefully it resurrects after 3 days, just like Jesus.
Yeah, well, we've got 8 teams in that event, I believe. I've got some good friends on a couple different teams. We've got, a lot to talk about there. Different groups being represented. So yeah, who's all going to be competing in your brawl?
We got Spooky Action at Distance, which is like the kind of Hydra team. I think that's kind of the closest to what AT veterans would know them as. We have Old Daddy J's Best Boys, which is effectively the GMVA team from last year and the year before that. With, I think, a few different members, but kind of the same core at the very least. So it'll be fun to see them fight without the Macarials, as I've said many times. Then we have, kind of the perennial tournament participants in Red versus Blue, and we also have Zero Talent, which is the most disgustingly stacked lineup of players I've ever seen, and I love it. I can't wait to see them fly. On top of that, we have and they're led by Hoodie Mafia, who is, oh god, what team does he run normally? I forget.
He was on Tuskers, but he's moved to NC. Well, he moved to NC Dot before the AT got cancelled.
Yeah, or put on hiatus for this year is the official terminology, my friend. I'm actually hoping it does come back, but obviously I can't say anything. Zero Talent is effectively an NC and Tuskers all-star team with a couple of members from Volta and Carl. Who is Carl? That's his resume. And alongside them we have Templar's Calcif and Stay Frosty. They're matching up in the third match of that day. That's going to be really fun. Templar's Calcif fought in the last tournament, so they have a lot of experience. Stay Frosty are, AT veterans again, although kind of they've never reached the top 8 as far as I'm aware. They're kind of a more middle of the road team, but I've always loved watching them, so it's been great to have them. And then finally we have Goons versus Brave Newbies, but the Goons aren't quite as weak as they might seem here, my friend, because they have a guest star, which is Rakados, or Radikos. I can't remember how to pronounce his name, or how it's written, and I don't want to scroll down my Discord. But that is the Tri-Captain from last AT.
Okay.
He just joined the Imperium, and he is helping guide this Goonswarm team to hopefully victory, I suppose. And they're going up against Brave Newbies. Legendary Alliance Tournament competitors here, but I'm going to absolutely love it, because that's the kind of match that we don't normally get to see in the Alliance Tournament. You know, we don't get to see people who actually fight each other on Tranquility brawl it out in a smaller format, where we can see who really has the best pilots.
Yeah, so I guess the sort of takeaway is that, you know, we don't actually get sub-capital fights on Tranquility, so, you know, we're creating a tournament for that to happen.
Don't tempt me. Next one will be a 50v50 tournament.
So what do our Intrepid champions win?
Yeah, our Intrepid champions there are prizes that have been sponsored by CCP, and that's first place will be getting, every member of their team will be getting an Apostle Lava Core Imperial skin and 500 Plex. Second place will be getting a Drekavac Metamateria skin and 200 Plex, and everyone in the third place team will be getting a Hecate Neon skin and 100 Plex. And alongside that, there's going to be a couple of competitions for people in the audience to take part in. After every single game, we're going to be raffling off a skin to the chat, so people will be able to, you know, just get stuff for turning up. And on top of that, there's going to be a competition for the people who submit the best Twitch clips to us. We're going to be giving out a set of +5 implants to everyone who gets in the top 5, and the top clip of each day will get 5 large skill injectors as well, so you can inject yourself into a raw core.
Nice. That's a good goals to have.
Only the spottiest of brains are allowed in my tournaments, moderator.
Glad to hear it. So any other points you want to hit on with regard to your Streamfleet Invitational Mark II?
Yeah, it's going on it's going to be on twitch.tv/Streamfleet. It's going to be at 2000 UTC on April 20th and 27th. Please come along and watch. And there's also going to be a episode on Sunday, but I'm not sure if we're going to publish this before it's out. So, hoo-hoo.
I'm actually really impressed that you're managing to sacrifice your 420 to be a responsible
I know, it's tragic, isn't
tournament.
it? I can't believe I scheduled an actual tournament for the day 420, and I'm not going to be high as shit.
I mean, that's you're lost, my friend.
It's fine. I will manage to survive somehow. Don't worry. But yeah, and on top of that, we do have a little bit of other tournament news. CCP is going to be heading to Russia in May, and they're going to be heading on the Russian leg of the series this year, the Invasion World Tour. And I do actually want to talk a little bit about that, because what they are planning to do is kind of interesting. Because every person who wins these in-person tournaments is going to get flown to FanFest next year. And I think that probably means that there's going to be a tournament that year. So I'm wondering, is CCP going to make it so that Iceland has a final championship and then like all the remaining teams? Because I can't remember if I looked at the World Tour, but it looks like there's like 7 places. Is there going to be like an 8-man tournament where the final place is just won at FanFest? That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
I don't actually know. I don't think any of this has been planned, so I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, it's kind of implied though is that what they're doing is, as you're saying, so each one of these events that is going to be kind of what CCP has split up FanFest into. So Eve Vegas, Eve Russia, then they had one in the Netherlands, did they not?
Yeah, they had one in Amsterdam just recently. In fact, I'm wearing my hat from it.
So well, they're going to take all the winners from these satellite events, and then they're going to fight it out for some undetermined event in Iceland. So that'll be a cool event.
Yeah, actually, speaking of Amsterdam, do you have any thoughts on the new ships that were revealed? I'm actually really curious as an outsider. I can't comment on them because I know the stats and everything about them now, but I'm interested to hear, or at least the proposed stats. Like this, they go through like 20 iterations. It's ridiculous, but I'm interested to hear what you think about them.
I'm really interested. So I'm already calling it the. I know it's not the right name, but the direct hack. The new hack from the
Ved hack.
The Ved hack. Yeah. I want to get my hands on that and get a real chance to play around with it. So promising, definitely. It's always good to see more subcaps get implemented, and to some credit to CCP, some of the subcaps that we're seeing being used on the smaller scale to kill Rorquals and Capitals are in fact actually the new Triglavian ships, because they just synergize well with the skirmishing style of play.
Is there any Triglavian ship that that they don't have in the line right now that you're looking forwards to? I'm curious.
I mean, I think everyone wants to see what a Triglavian dreadnought would look like, and what kind of implications that would have on the meta. It stands to reason that they're going to want to have a Triglavian ship for, I would assume, most of the sub-capital line. I mean, CCP is not going to put the time and effort that they have into the kind of the lore and the infrastructure of the abyssal space without really fleshing that out and getting their money's worth, right? So, I mean, obviously you know far more about that than I do, but we don't need a CSM member getting banned for NDA leaks.
No, we don't. Alright, well, if that's it, there's no reason to hang around anymore. So, thank you for your time, everyone. It's been lovely having you, and this was the first episode of Jin'mawderation.